Hello, everybody. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes now just to get all the attendees on board while Ruben clicks them on to join. Thank you for attending this wee short webinar. It's aimed more to give you an idea of the legislation now in Europe for the purchase of children's beds for medical use. We'll wait for a couple of seconds just to see who else comes on board. It's a very simple PowerPoint. We'll be sending out a more concise PowerPoint with the more details on it, but rather than sitting watching about, I think it was at one stage 62 slides, at least then you can see, but there's information on it that you may want. So I'll just wait a couple of minutes and then I'll start actually into the PowerPoint if you don't mind. And I'll start at 25.2. Is that okay, Ruben? So you know.
Yep, that's grand.
And if you attended the previous webinar, as you can see, I'm not in the showroom today because this is a bit simpler. This is in one of our offices in Belfast. So, and I've got headphones on because everybody complains that my computer whirs a lot, which I never hear. Right. Let's have a look time-wise. Yep, still got a couple of minutes yet. Hopefully everybody's jumped on board now. Squeaky chair, I do apologize. Okie dokie. What I'll do is we're going to go through the PowerPoint stage by stage, just to give you an idea of the implications to this to yourselves. And then there'll be a certain point where we'll show you a short video of what we have done. Lisclare themselves have had dealings with, we would have called it pediatric beds in the past, but now there's actually, before that, there was actually no standard for these. So we would have attended assessments with both OTs and now public health nurses to do assessments for children. But I'll explain more as I go along. So what actually happened was, as you can see, it's BSCN 50637-2017. The manufacturers were made aware that from 2017 that they intended to have a new standard for children's nursing beds, performance and medical, an essential performance of that type of product. There had been no standard before. There was an adult standard, but it didn't actually correspond with children, which I'll explain during that. The manufacturers then would have had 3 years to adjust, design, develop, so that their products would have met the new European standard. That became law at 2020, and all manufacturers from that date must comply. Now, I know the first questions everybody's going to get worried about is what happens to all the beds purchased in the past. But there's no need to panic about those. Those beds, if they were assessed by the companies, would have been done so to make sure that there was no entrapment risks, etc., that have used paddings, cocoons, all sorts of bits and pieces to avoid risk to the child. They can be reissued. They don't have to be thrown out because obviously the same risk assessment can still be done. But because the beds were purchased before the end of August, then they're fine. The hassle is there's some companies out there using this as a scare tactic to replace beds, which I find a bit disrespectful, but I'll not say any more about that. So I could nearly go list by list of the original standard, which was BSEN 6601-2-52. I can quote it. And it was the best standard that was created for adults. Right. This was the issue always. What size is an adult? The new one is set aside exactly for children, and you'll see why as we go along here. So obviously the standards have much of similarities. Okay, they're all about safety in the bed, functionality, mattress selection, which is actually quite important, electric safety, safety rail design, durability, and load testings, which is actually covered in both of the actual standards. But unfortunately, as I say, it's the size and the gaps that they're obviously going to be different than a children's bed. Okay. Now, that was the standard that they had for an adult bed. Anybody who has done a bed with me in the past will have known that what becomes a child's bed was that magic measurement of 146 centimeters, which I think is 4 foot 11 3/4 or something like that. And above that, then no matter whether it was an adult or a child, the bed was set to be able to be used with a person above that height. And the entrapments and gaps were set for what would have been a very small adult. They go right up to 1.85 meters, would you believe? And then obviously some of the beds. But anything without that range, they would look for a risk assessment that should have been performed just to make sure that the person was safe and was able to use the bed. But as I said before, there was no child safety standard for children's beds before this. And again, this was the sort of standard thing that happens. The risk assessment should be carried out to make sure that there's no risk for entrapment. You'd refer to manufacturer's guidelines of what you do in the bed. In other words, read the actual the manual for the bed. And the same applies for plus size beds, would you believe? Obviously for 40, 50 stone clients, that sort of thing. But that's for the standard. But this is the new children's standard. As I say, that's the number that you'll get used to. And if you ever tender for beds, that will become the norm for the tenderer to have that as the actual standard that the bed should have been manufactured to. And that becomes quite important as we go along. So as I said, it covers the same standard before, but there's additional requirements specific for children, which you'll see. Now, heights. This is it. As I said, as you can see, the 146 is the magic height for the start of adulthood, apparently, according to European standards. However, the children's starts, as you see, goes up to 155. So there is a crossover there. Now, obviously, you do get adults below 146 centimeters. And this is something that doesn't fit into the categories because obviously they're an adult. But the basically, this has nothing to do with the age group or anything like that. But a child height less than or equal to 155 centimeters means that they set these beds out to do that. Now, they categorized 3 types of bed, okay, which I'll go through a bit further in a moment. And again, by height. 75 centimeters is a crib. Up to 125 centimeters from 75 is what they will regard as a cot. And then what is regarded as a junior bed is 125 then to 155. There is obviously cots for adults, but it doesn't define applicable ages. Children exceeding the height or weight limits of 155 and 70 can fit into an adult bed, and it's a bit grey. But obviously, if they're above the 145, they're suitable for an adult bed. But again, in this instance, an understanding of the assumptions contained in bed standards will help you do your risk assessment. Now, the standard doesn't obviously apply to incubators, children's cots for domestic use. That means any retail product, non-medical beds or bunk beds. It's got nothing to do with that. These are all what would be defined as medical beds. Now, give you a visual idea of what we're talking about. You can see there'll be obviously the types of newborn babies, obviously, that are put in those new cribs. Then you've got what we would call cots that are designed for protection where the child has no awareness of danger, but that can also be an adult. So it covers those as well. And obviously a junior nursing bed, either in the acute sector or into the domestic sector, we would be doing most of. We have done for the last 20 odd years. We've had a 180 junior child's bed. My daughters in their younger days were actually used as the model for the Westphalia, which was my first model for this, because we wanted a thing that was ergonomically correct for a small child. So the environments are as follows. You'll see it. There's obviously, this is where beds are used for clients. You've got intensive care, critical care. You have acute hospital, long term. You have long term in nursing homes or in the medical supervisions, which would be the one that I'll be concentrating would be domestic, where number 3 would be more long term nursing. How would you say without offending everybody? That's the Michael's house unit where the children are staying and like that, where they have supervised obviously staff, and then there's outpatients and hospital care. But really the next slide shows you that we're focused mainly as Lisclare on section 4, the domestic use, which is the next slide. That's our section there. That's home care use. That's the person's own house where you do not have any medical supervision. There's no additional assistance. There's no crash teams. There's no things like that. And it's an unregulated electric environment, because Lord knows when the last time they had their house electrically tested and things like that. So that's the environment that we're talking about, patients' own homes. Now, the safety in the bed was about all these, and part of the standards is entrapment, which is the big issue. In the past, years ago, there have been quite a few fatalities because of this. And then there's the obvious of snagging, fingers, pinching, and patient falls. Patient falls would be rolling out of bed and things like that. But on the new children's standards, you'll see the next slide is the one that shows you the measurements. So basically, they've taken into consideration that a 60 millimeter, 6 centimeters, is enough that but it cannot be greater than 6 centimeters. And the reason being is it means that the child's head can't go through a side rail. The other gaps, as you can see, where there's partially enclosed, are anywhere between 4 centimeters and 3, and that's to avoid arms going through, the entrapment of body parts, things like that, legs and feet. But the side rail clearances, for some strange reason, stayed the same. From the top of the mattress, 220 millimeters or 22 centimeters. So that's the same as the adult bed, which is a measurement from here to here. So to half your body, would you believe? And the safety side must cover at least half of the bed length. Again, everybody, this is why you would have got seen the full length. Side rails becoming more prevalent than the old, what would have been the chrome sort of trombone ones. Now, this is the important bit. Accessories which could be accidentally removed by the client cannot be used to achieve compliance. So the companies can't use sheets, padding, anything that is not made of, it's the bed frame must meet the specification, and you can't, pardon the expression, cheat. When you're using padding and covers to reduce gaps in non-compliant beds, a risk assessment should be covered out. That would be your old beds. So basically, you noted that you've taken care of all the possible gaps for injury. And padding is basically there to avoid any protection against involuntary movement, and it's basically to soften the blow if they strike it, kick it. You know, that's the obvious. Functionality is basically very similar. These are quick slides that we can go through. And basically the profiling, the height range, the underbed clearance and the user access is the same, but the profiling had to be reduced to be more ergonomically designed for a child, which again I'll approach in a second or two. The mattress selection is actually quite important. Believe it or not, the safety standards, all the gaps must be tested using tools, which will be on the email that we'll send out to you, where they'll actually be testing gaps. Now, you can't do this. So the manufacturer of the beds should suggest on their handbook exactly the size of the mattress that should be used with the bed. That's width, depth, and length, and exactly the type of density of the foam that should be used. And the reason being is obviously if you press down some cheaper foams, it'll compact a lot easier than others. And the Dali section was pressing down at the underneath the side rails, not actually over the top. It's where the plant may have rolled and tried to get out underneath, and then the mattress springs up again, and you can imagine the horrors that's happened there. Electrical safety is paramount, obviously, with all the beds. It's the same because you're, as I said, you're in an unregulated electronic tested area. So the wires, everything has to be basically designed that it doesn't get cut easy, get run over by the hoist, chewed by the dog. The safety rail design again had to change, as we said, for the children's beds because of the entrapment gaps, which I'll go through again at the end. As you see, they must be tested. Now, this is the important bit. Safety rails must be tested with the bed, including detachable rails. And the next clip is actually quite important, really. Beds which depend on detachable rails must include a warning about hazards of using incompatible, untested rails. So you can't fit a third party's rails onto a bed and think it's going to work. This necessarily will not happen. You need either a check from the company who's made the third party rails or ask the bed company themselves. Durability, believe it or not, is part of the test because they wanted these products to be of quality and last. And some of the tests that goes into it, people just don't believe. The bed has to be tested for over 3,000 times at a standard weighing rate. So you can imagine it gets put on the rig and goes up and down continually 3,000 times to make sure there's no excess wear or tear. The standard weighing rate on the edge of the bed has to be tested to 10,000 times, believe it or not. And that basically means patients getting in and out of bed where they're sitting on the edge of the bed to make sure that, again, there's no undue wear and tear. Now, these tests take time to do. Side rails, I mean, 30,000 times. Now, how many years is that going to cover? So you can imagine this, the durability tests on the beds for the companies are quite intense. And one of the things, as I've always said, people don't realize is side rails are actually weight tested, the new ones. So these new beds will be actually covered by the same as the old test, where they're actually weight tested in all directions. So that basically they can use it to roll about on, pull on, not to sit on, as you can see, because they're not designed for that. But it gets you the idea. And even the hand control, it has to be dropped over 1,000 times and still work. Now, loading and stability is obviously something that is due about durability as well as such. So it does actually has to be tested quite strenuously that it's able to take its weight, and it actually has to take above its weight, to tell you the truth. As you can see, twice the standard weight limit. The bed should not tip when loaded with 185 kilograms at various points. In other words, somebody sitting on the bed or the corner. You can imagine if a visitor comes into the hospital, they usually sit at the edge of the bed. And side rails must load bear, which I went through earlier on. And you can see the directions that we're talking about in the actual test carried out. This made a huge difference to side rails because they became a lot more durable. And again, that meant that the patient could use them for turning themselves or adjusting themselves in bed. Now, what we had to do, obviously we had already a 180 Dali within our range, and before that it was the 180 Westphalia. But when we did this, there was absolutely no guidelines to go by. And funny enough, look back at the pictures on the Westphalia that we did, and it actually meets as close as I've ever seen to the new standards, which I'm quite proud about. But obviously we'd have been overcautious with padding and all the accessories that we used to use. We created the Dali 180. We couldn't call it a children's bed because there was no standard, but it was anatomically proportioned. It's fully compliant without the padding. We've actually had the bed, it's tested now. It's complete range of padding accessories for it, so you can get every possible combination you could think of and some that you've never seen before. And we have an optional extra high side rail for added fall protection. But again, that's where we would help you carry out the risk assessment. Now, with the actual bed, you'll see that there is the anatomical proportions for a child, for the junior bed, okay? For the head section, the seat, the thigh, and the foot, which we complied to. We didn't just cut one end of the bed, we shrunk the whole bed down so it was ergonomically correct, so that the backrest and the leg rest was all proportioned for that height of person. The gaps was the biggest thing that we had to look at, especially between the side rails, below the side rails, and within the mattress platform. And we actually spent a lot of investment with Firmar to make sure that we covered every part of this, because obviously it's very rarely you'll put the bed in its basic form, because obviously that child would be completely aware of its surroundings and not be needing any padding. Because and then we had to make a full range of cot bumpers, but you'll notice immediately that we've actually got a third rail now, and that was to comply that the gap was less than 6 centimeters. Ours is actually just above 3, which is great, which you'll see in the video in a minute or two. Like I said, the head and footboard padding is all there. There's pictures of it. We created a cot side padding with a fine mesh, and even the fine mesh had to abide by the standard where they can't get something through and hurt themselves. But it obviously gives a field of vision for the child outside the bed. And then obviously we have added protection if you need to by an insert that fits into the bed with a full surround. We would call it the an in-bed safety system. Some people would have called it the old version of the cocoon. But you'll see the adoption in the next slide that we did for the clip-on slide rails. And again, this is not to try and create from somebody climbing over the top. It's just the awareness of some of the children that when they sit up, they may be able to lean over the third rail. This would be enough. If this doesn't suit, then you're going into what would be a prescribed cot that we do as well. And that cot would be risk assessed by ourselves with alongside the nurse or the occupational therapist. And the biggest question we're asking then is the cot side heights, etc., etc. But the cots are actually very easy to do because everything's built into the cot for protection anyway. Now, before we do any questions, Ruben's going to play a short video on the actual bed that we delivered. We put this together ourselves and we're quite proud of it. And again, you'll get a copy at the end. And just the day after the video, I'll ask if there's any questions.
Today, I would like to present the new Dali Junior Bed that is compliant with the current standard for children's beds, BSEN 50637. This standard became regulation for all manufacturers from August 2020. The new standard means that all entrapment issues for a child have now been removed without the use of padding or sheets and complies to the measurements set out in the standard for the bed frame. It should be noted that padding and accessories that can be removed by the user cannot form part of the bed for testing purposes under this standard. The bed platform is ergonomically designed for a child, with each section being sized proportionally for a junior bed. The Dali Junior Bed is available with a standard high-low function that is 40 to 80 centimeters. This is measured to the mattress platform of the bed. Alternatively, you could have a low-entry version with a range of 23 to 63 centimeters, again measured to the mattress platform. The bed can be positioned into a chair position using tilt and profiling features via the handset. As you can see, the side rail gaps have been reduced as per the standard and are no more than 30 millimeters, with the distance from the top of the side rail to the top of the mattress being 22 centimeters. All gaps in the frame of the bed are no bigger than 60 millimeters. When the side rails are lowered, the mattress sits slightly higher than the top of the side rail, making for a smoother and more comfortable transfer. Each function can be locked out individually using the key provided to ensure extra safety for the user. An extra high clamp-on side rail is an optional accessory if required for the user. for extra safety and comfort, we have a full range of impact padding available for the Dali Junior Bed, covering the side rails and the headboard. There is also a complete impact protection padding system available.
Okay. Obviously, there's two versions of that bed. Actually, there's a standard one for 40 to 80, and then there's a low entry version that goes from 23 to 63. So if the child wants to stay independent for transfers, or it's assessed that they may need it, so that you can lower the bed to the floor with a crash mat, that they can get in and out of the bed themselves safely. We'll be sending on this complete PowerPoint, and probably we actually are able to send a recording of this to anybody who registered anyway. But I'll just ask, is there any questions that we know of yet? No? Is it my interest?
Nope.
Nope, that was pretty straight and easy. But again, if there's anybody, if there's anything you think you know from the last webinar, my details is keith@lisclare.com. If you have any details, the only thing we can't do is we can't send you out a copy of the actual full European standards, because there's a licensing law for that, and you have to buy it in, and it costs £146, and we're not allowed to sell it, or even more. I think it's €200. We have the copy ourselves, obviously, because it was in our best interest to understand what was happening, as well as the manufacturers. But if any more, we'll send out the recording, and I do thank you very much for attending, and hope you enjoyed that smart presentation.